The dust of the high plains clung to Alara's threadbare skirt, a shroud against the biting wind that seemed to whisper the same condemnations her mother's voice had shrieked. Each step was an ache, a dull throb in her lower back, a constant reminder of the life burgeoning within her, the very reason for her exile. She walked with her head bowed, not in supplication, but against the relentless glare of the sun and the searing shame that burned hotter than any desert heat. Her mother's final words, "You are a blight upon this house, a whore and a shame, begone," echoed in the hollow space where her heart used to be, replaced now by a desperate, animalistic need to simply exist, to find a patch of earth where she and the growing seed of her undoing might draw breath. There had been no farewells, no pity from her father, only the silent, grim set of his jaw as he watched her driven from the only home she had ever known. The small bundle clutched in her hand held little more than a hardened crust of bread and a silver locket, a forgotten trinket from a happier time, long before her naivete had blossomed into this ruinous condition. Days blurred into a single, parched testament to her endurance. She drank from muddy streams, her throat raw, her lips cracked. Nights were a cold terror, huddled beneath a meager blanket, listening to the vast, indifferent silence of the wilderness. The fear for herself was immense, but the fear for the burgeoning life, the innocent within, was a cold, constant companion, twisting her insides tighter than hunger ever could. She was not alone in her misery, a paradox that sharpened her loneliness. Each flutter within her belly was a vivid reminder of her isolation, a cruel trick of nature. The sparse settlements she encountered offered no solace, only averted gazes and the swift closing of doors, the word of her dishonor having seemingly traveled faster than she could walk. The judgment was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak woven from whispers and righteous indignation, stifling her breath. She had heard of a doctor, an eccentric, a man who lived far from the prying eyes of conventional society, a recluse whose practice was sought only by those with nowhere else to turn. A last resort, a desperate gamble. The clinic was a squat, unpainted building, clinging precariously to the side of a small, desolate hill, a sentinel of solitude against the vast, empty sky. A wisp of smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, the only sign of life in the oppressive stillness. Hope, a fragile, almost forgotten bird, stirred faintly within her chest. She approached with hesitant steps, her legs trembling, not from exhaustion alone but from the profound vulnerability of her plea. The door, when she finally reached it, was made of heavy, scarred oak, testament to countless storms weathered. She lifted a shaking hand and knocked, the sound surprisingly loud in the silence. An intrusion. The wait was interminable, each second stretching into an eternity of fear and anticipation. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a man framed by the dim light within. He was tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of years, unreadable and deep-set beneath a brow furrowed by long study. Dr. Immerse Thorn. His hair, dark and streaked with gray, fell haphazardly across his forehead, and a faint smell of antiseptic and something earthy, like dried herbs, emanated from him. He simply observed her, his gaze sweeping over her weary frame, her protruding belly, her haunted eyes. No judgment, no pity, just an unnerving professional assessment. Yes. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth but also of the condemnation she had come to expect. Alara swallowed, her throat tight. I have nowhere to go, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And I am with child. She braced herself for the inevitable rejection, the cold dismissal. But it did not come. Instead, his gaze lingered on her, then shifted to the empty landscape behind her, as if weighing her against the vast indifference of the world. After a long moment he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said. The words simple, pragmatic, a lifeline thrown into her ocean of despair. The clinic smelled of clean linen, old books, and a faint, metallic tang. It was not a home, but for Alara, in that moment it was salvation. The interior of Dr. Thorne's clinic was as stark as the man himself. A single main room served as both waiting area and consulting space, furnished with a scarred wooden table and a few hardback chairs. Beyond it, a narrow hallway led to what Alara presumed were treatment rooms and the doctor's private quarters. He showed her to a small, windowless room at the back, furnished with a cot, a wash basin, and a single lantern. "You can stay here," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. "In exchange, you will assist with the running of the clinic. Clean, sterilize instruments, tend to what needs tending." His eyes met hers, holding a silent expectation. "The work is hard. The patients are often desperate. There will be no idleness." Alara merely nodded, too exhausted to voice gratitude, too wary to hope for kindness. His practicality was a sharp contrast to the emotional turmoil that had defined her existence for months. He offered no false comfort, no empty promises, only the stark reality of survival, and for now that was enough. Her days quickly fell into a relentless rhythm dictated by the demands of the clinic and the doctor's austere routine. Alara swept dust from every corner, scrubbed instruments until they gleamed, changed soiled linens, and stoked the embers in the stove. Her hands, once accustomed to finer work, grew rough and calloused. Her movements, initially slow and hesitant, gained purpose and efficiency. Dr. Thorne observed her, a silent, almost predatory watchfulness in his gaze, but he never offered praise, nor did he find fault. He simply expected the work to be done, and Alara, driven by a primal instinct for security, delivered. She learned to anticipate his needs, handing him the correct scalpel before he asked, preparing the tincture before he spoke the name of the herb. Their communication was often limited to grunts, nods, and the shared language of urgent action during patient visits. Patients came and went, a procession of the sick, the injured, the desperate. Farmers with broken bones, prospectors with fever, women in various stages of childbirth, all seeking the quiet expertise of the reclusive doctor. Alara witnessed suffering she had never imagined, saw the fragility of life laid bare. And through it all, Dr. Thorne remained a figure of calm, his hands steady, his mind sharp, his face a mask of detached professionalism. He saved lives, mended wounds, eased pain, yet showed no visible pride or satisfaction. It was simply his purpose. Alara found herself studying him when he was unaware, trying to decipher the man beneath the gruff exterior. She saw the fine lines around his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders when he thought himself unobserved, the way his fingers, so precise with a needle, sometimes paused, almost imperceptibly, over a patient's brow, a fleeting moment of something akin to contemplation. He was not unkind, merely absent of softness. Her own condition progressed. The subtle swell became an undeniable curve, then a pronounced roundness. Her clothes, once ill-fitting, now strained at the seams. She felt the child move more vigorously, a gentle flutter transforming into insistent kicks. Each movement was a paradox, a fierce love intertwining with a deep, abiding fear. What would become of them? How could she, an outcast, protect such a vulnerable being in a world so harsh? She knew the doctor saw, that he catalogued her increasing discomfort, the slight wince when she bent, the slower pace she adopted. He never mentioned her pregnancy directly, never inquired about the father, never spoke of the future. He treated her not as a pregnant woman, but as a capable, if temporary, assistant, and for that Alara was profoundly grateful. It allowed her a fragile dignity, a space where her shame could recede, replaced by the immediate demands of survival and the slow, arduous work of rebuilding herself. She clung to the quiet routine, to the predictability of the days, finding a strange comfort in the doctor's silence, a refuge from the world's condemnation. The clinic became her fortress, small and unassuming, but impenetrable to the whispers outside. The approaching winter, the first frost glittering on the window panes each morning, felt less like a threat and more like a shared solitude. The first blizzard struck with a ferocity that seemed intent on tearing the very fabric of existence apart. For 3 days, the world outside the clinic's thick walls ceased to exist, swallowed by a maelstrom of howling wind and blinding snow. The clinic, usually a beacon for the ailing, became a besieged fortress, its windows rattling, its foundations groaning under the onslaught. Supplies, always meager, began to dwindle rapidly. The fire kept roaring, consumed firewood at an alarming rate. It was during this enforced isolation that Alara truly saw the depth of Dr. Thorne's resilience, and he, in turn, began to see beyond her shame. He moved with an unhurried determination, tending to the last lingering patients who had been trapped by the storm. His face grim, his movements precise despite the cold that seeped into every corner of the building. One of the patients, an old prospector with a hacking cough, took a turn for the worse. His breathing grew shallow, his skin clammy. Dr. Thorne worked tirelessly, his lamp casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Alara, without a word, anticipated his every need, fetching hot water, preparing poultices, holding the prospector's trembling hand while the doctor administered a bitter concoction. She was no longer just an assistant. She was an extension of his will, a silent, efficient partner. When the prospector began to fade, a rasping was his only sound, Dr. Thorne looked at Alara, a flicker of something raw in his eyes, frustration, perhaps, or a rare glimpse of weariness. "He needs the fever root," he stated, his voice tight. "But the supply is low. Too low for this. The roots were stored in an outdoor shed. A perilous journey through the blizzard." Alara looked at the howling white outside, then at the dying man, then back at the doctor. Without a moment's hesitation, she pulled on a heavy coat and scarf, already moving towards the door. "I'll get it," she said, her voice steady, determined. Dr. Thorne's hand shot out, catching her arm. His grip was surprisingly firm. "You are with child, Alara. The storm, it's dangerous." It was the first time he had spoken her name, the first time he had acknowledged her condition directly, and the words, though a warning, held a faint thread of concern. Alara met his gaze. "He will die without it, doctor. And I am stronger than I look." Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held a quiet resolve, a strength born of necessity. He released her arm, his expression unreadable, but a silent acknowledgement passed between them. She fought her way through the blizzard, the wind a physical assault, the snow blinding. The shed was a mere outline in the swirling white, but she found it, her fingers clumsy with cold as she fumbled with the latch. She returned moments later, a small bag of roots clutched triumphantly, her face numb, her clothes stiff with ice, but a spark of defiance in her eyes. The doctor took the roots, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary before he turned back to the patient. They saved the prospector that night, a victory carved out of the heart of the storm. As the blizzard raged outside, Alara felt the first sharp pangs. Not the gentle flutters, but a deep, unfamiliar clenching in her lower abdomen. She ignored them, attributing them to the cold, the exertion, the fear. She continued to stoke the fire, to boil water, to clean. But the pangs returned, more insistent, closer together. Her breath hitched. The baby was coming. Now, in the heart of the most brutal winter storm, a cold dread, far more profound than any fear of the elements, settled over her. She glanced at Dr. Thorne, who was now meticulously cleaning his instruments, his back to her. How could she tell him? How could she burden him with this now when they were isolated, cut off from the world? Her transformation from a cowering girl to a woman of quiet strength had been forged in these very walls. But this was a crucible she had to face alone. Or so she believed. The world outside roared, and within her, another, more primal storm began to gather its force. The quiet connection that had slowly woven itself between them was about to be tested in the most profound way. The true storm was not outside, but within Alara. The pain, sharp and relentless, stripped away all pretense, all dignity. She managed to stammer out the words to Dr. Thorne, her face pale, slick with sweat. He turned, his professional mask instantly in place, yet his eyes, for a fleeting moment, held a flicker of something akin to grim recognition, an understanding of the immense, solitary journey she was embarking upon. "To the cot," he commanded, his voice steady, devoid of the panic that threatened to consume her. He worked with an unhurried precision, clearing his instruments, heating water, his movements economical and efficient. He spoke little, his instructions clipped, direct. Breathe, Elara. Push. Not yet. Now his hands, which had mended so many broken things, were surprisingly gentle, yet firm, guiding her through the terrifying, exhilarating process. Hours passed in a haze of agony and primal instinct. The blizzard outside seemed to mirror the tempest within her. Each gust of wind a sharp intake of breath, each groan of the clinic a primal cry from her own throat. She pushed, she strained, her body contorting, demanding release. Dr. Thorne remained a stoic presence at her side, his gaze unwavering, his hand on her forehead surprisingly cool and comforting. There was no room for shame now, only the raw, undeniable force of creation. He was not merely a doctor, but an anchor in a raging sea, his quiet strength a bulwark against the overwhelming pain. Just when she thought she could bear no more, a new sound cut through the roar of the wind and the rhythmic contractions. A cry, thin and reedy, yet bursting with the raw power of new life. A profound silence fell, punctuated only by the cries of the newborn and the fading moan of the blizzard. Dr. Thorne held the tiny, squalling bundle, his face, for the first time, softened, almost reverent. He cleaned the child, wrapped it in a clean linen, and then, with a tenderness that brought tears to Elara's eyes, placed the baby in her arms. A girl, small, fragile, but utterly perfect. Elara's fingers traced the delicate features, the tiny fists, the rosebud mouth. All the fear, the shame, the hardship, melted away in that instant, replaced by an overwhelming wave of fierce, protective love. She was no longer Elara, the outcast, the shamed girl. She was Mama. Dr. Thorne stepped back, allowing them their moment. He turned to tend to the last tasks, his shoulders slightly less rigid than before. The clinic, once a place of stark necessity, now felt imbued with a different kind of warmth, the silent, beating heart of a nascent family. The blizzard had begun to subside, the wind softening to a mournful sigh, the snow falling less fiercely. A fragile peace settled over the desolate landscape, mirroring the quiet serenity that had bloomed within Elara. She looked at the doctor, truly looked at him, seeing not just the gruff recluse, but the man who had offered sanctuary, who had tended her with skill and unspoken care, who had been witness to her rawest vulnerability and greatest strength. Their eyes met across the dim room. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips, a rare and profound gesture that spoke volumes. It was not a grand declaration, but an acknowledgement of shared ordeal, of unspoken gratitude, of a silent promise forged in the crucible of life and death. Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not leave. This isolated clinic, this quiet, capable man, this tiny, perfect being in her arms, this was her home now. Her mother's words, once a branding iron, now held no power. She had found her dignity not in societal acceptance, but in survival, in resilience, and in the profound, unbreakable bond of motherhood. The journey had been long, fraught with despair, but it had led her to this unexpected haven, a place where life, even in its quietest forms, found a way to bloom against the harshest winds. The past was a shadow, but the future, though uncertain, was illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern and the steady rhythm of a new heart beating against her own. She had endured, she had transformed, and she was finally truly free.